Well, have a seat. I'm going to take advantage of you right now. If that's all right. Oh, here she is. Never mind. Lauren, yes, indeed. A round of applause. All right, you two. I'll turn it over to you.
Alrighty.
Perfect.
We agreed ahead of time we would do 5-minute openings, and I'm going first, and then at the end we have 2-minute closings. In between, we think we can be civilized enough that we don't actually need a moderator or a referee to break things up. But I guess we'll see. So I will begin. The people who speak of liberty can be divided into 2 general categories. The first category is the people who believe in the concept of non-aggression, who believe in the concept of self-ownership and voluntary interaction, that I own me, you own you, and we do not commit aggression against each other. There's a word for those people. It's called voluntarist, which is sort of a subset of anarchist. I like voluntarist. It's a little more specific. The second category of people who waxes eloquent about liberty are the people who talk about those principles and adhere to those principles and advocate those principles if and when their own interests are served by them. And the moment their interests are not served by them, then they talk about having a more nuanced position and being practical and being realistic and saying, yeah, that's the ideal, but this is necessary right now. There's a word for those people too. That word is statist. Because every statist wants freedom for himself and not freedom for others. Every statist. I don't care if it's fascist, communist, anything in between, as if those are opposites. Every statist says, I generally want freedom, but there are some things we need government to do. There are some things we need authoritarian violence for. So there is nothing special. There is nothing pro-liberty about saying, I believe in freedom except when my interests are at stake, and then I believe in violent aggression against others. People in the second category often tend to use euphemisms, and I expect us to have several examples of that today. One is closed borders. There isn't a freaking door. There's a line that is thousands of miles long, and there are men with guns. If you advocate the initiation of violence, say so. Don't call it closed borders, because that's not what it is. It is violent aggression. And if you are willing to sell out the principle out of necessity and it's an emergency and being practical, then do not complain when the exact same lack of principle is used against you. I will use this example. Well, no, not all gun owners commit crime. Not all of them are violent and nasty, but some do. Let me let you in on a secret. 100% of gun crimes are committed by people with guns. So do we take the category of people that is people who have guns and use violence, state violence, to disarm them all in the name of what some of them would have done if we don't? That is a purely statist position. It is an immoral position, and it is founded on the exact same fear-based, unprincipled, authoritarian BS that the closed border position is based upon. Every animal wants to avoid pain. Every animal wants to avoid violence against itself. And most of them are just fine initiating violence against others. There is no virtue. There is no principle. There is nothing noble about advocating your own freedom, but not the freedom of the person next to you. To say that you are opposed to violence when you are its victim, but that we need violence when you are its beneficiary, that is the philosophy of cockroaches and sewer rats. It should not be the philosophy of human beings.
I can't imagine who he was talking about. All those strong words. All right, I hope you guys don't mind if I'm a little lazy and sit down. I don't want to trip in the heels, but before coming to this debate today, I sat down and grabbed myself a bottle of vodka and watched a shit ton of Larken Rose's videos, and there is no doubt in my mind that you are a very, very intelligent man. Most people I meet within this community are quite intelligent. However, unfortunately, within some situations, how clever you are can actually render you ineffective. It's a rather interesting and bizarre thing that's observed by psychologists, and that's the smartest people tend to have the most self-doubt. They tend to question themselves the most. They tend to consider more factors and run themselves in ideological circles more than anyone else. They're just far more effective at it. And sometimes that can be a very good thing. We should question ourselves. We should have some degree of self-doubt. But the degree of questioning we do should never render us ineffectual. We should never be sitting outside our front door with a list of pros and cons all day theorizing till the 7th page where we've got alien invasion on that list. Otherwise, you won't be able to achieve anything. There are endless amounts of questions we can ponder, but the only point in asking them is so that we can engage in the real world more effectively, so that we can engage in other people's lives more effectively and make decisive decisions. The unfortunate thing with libertarians and anarchists, as much as I love you lot, is despite their worship of steely-eyed, effectiveness-obsessed Randian characters, in the political realm, they tend to be an absolute non-starter. Almost every libertarian and anarchist I've met is at the very least, a few IQ points above the average person, but in almost all cases, they render themselves useless with endless theorizing. They go beyond just planning for that alien invasion, and y'all are up till 4 in the morning having debates on child slavery and texts that are longer than the freaking Bible. It's impressive, and I would categorize this in the mildly entertaining but useless argument category, and I would actually put the open borders debate in that category as well. It is completely useless when trying to engage with the wider world. So let's rip off that Santa Claus Band-Aid right now. Factoring out the highly unlikely apocalyptic style situation, in this day and age, fulfilling the precursors needed to have an open border state, such as getting rid of the welfare state, getting rid of democracy, and having immunity from foreign powers, is indeed a pipe dream. Don't cry to me about it. I didn't make the rules. I don't like the rules either. That would be human nature, the universe, God, thousands of years of history. You can blame them. So what's likely going to happen in this debate is, instead of a productive discussion on actual policies and what can and cannot be changed in reality, if I were a betting man, I would say that Larken is going to pull our discussion into the hyper-theoretical, where I am obviously advocating that we shoot poor ladies walking across magical dirt into Canada, because that is clearly what closed borders people want. So fine, we can have fun running into the realm of the theoretical, the exceptions, the extremes, how much of a statist I am. But at the end of the day, for a myriad of reasons, the state is not going away. And while the state still stands, and while other states still stand, closed borders preserve far more freedom than open borders ever could. And here, laid out simply for you, are my 4 reasons. The first one: borders prevent highly totalitarian groups, super PACs, and corporations from importing foreign voters to tip elections in their favor. 2, borders prevent the welfare state from growing, which prevents more money from being stolen from you, as you like to put it. They also prevent the state from inevitably collapsing, and no, before you think that's a good thing, I mean more, you all starve to death while the state still exists, like in Venezuela. Now, just for good measure, my 3rd and my 4th reason is also relevant in the highly hypothetical case that the state does truly collapse and is destroyed. 3, closed borders prevent the invasion of a totalitarian culture, and this is something we really need to talk about, because I find totalitarian cultures to be far more of a threat than even governments. Because I can go to Somalia, where their state has collapsed, and I still, if I'm born there, have a 98% chance of being dragged into a witch doctor's office screaming to have my genitals mutilated. Not so free there. Politics is downstream of culture. 4, borders prevent the invasion and occupation of our land by totalitarian governments, more totalitarian governments actually, who would swoop in faster than a fat kid on cookies to get our resources in Lebensraum. Sorry, but whether you like it or not, in the age of nuclear weapons, drone strikes, and Navy SEAL teams, band of non-state forces cannot even remotely compete with these death machines that are state armies. I don't like it either, but it is a fact. Let's hope one of those death machines is on your side, because you're easy pickings for the rest of them if one's not, and some of them are not as nice as others. Now that my main arguments are out of the way, I just want to finish by doing Larken a favor of starting this debate on very clear grounds that he requests all closed borders advocates do. He demands we define our stance properly as the advocacy of a really long line of men with guns who allow you to enter a location only at a politician's discretion. And guilty as charged. Fine, that's exactly what I'm doing. Now, Larken, the real question is, will you admit what you're defending? An immediate disbanding of the only force effective enough to keep us from being invaded by a more totalitarian government and more totalitarian cultures than our own, at the peril of all our freedoms we have left, and simply for the purpose of signaling one's ideological purity. Thank you.
I'll answer your question since you ended with a question that was actually a statement disguised as a question. It was an assertion that the only thing protecting us is men at the border. I also noticed the euphemisms throughout your statement when you say borders do this, borders do that. Borders don't do anything. They're an imaginary line. What you meant was men with guns, but yes. I do appreciate that you got around to admitting that you meant men with guns. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to claim that in a country of 300 million people, 100 million of whom are not only armed, but they own 300 million guns. So in about 10 minutes, it could be 300 million armed people, that the only thing protecting us is the TSA? Really? That's why we're free?
No. It would be the men with guns, which is how you define borders. I'm going by your definition of borders, the men with guns, not the TSA.
But ICE, whichever it is, if there was actually an invasion, they have nowhere near the capacity to stop it. However, the armed populace does. But the entirety of your argument was that the ends justify the means. And I wonder if you accept the exact same argument from liberals when they say, if we don't have gun control, we will have school shootings, we will have murder. What can we have to protect us if not disarming the people? How do you respond to them when you just use the exact same argument they do?
Well, that's the problem. You're saying it's the exact same when it's not the exact same argument. I actually happen to believe in some cases the ends do justify the means. Not all means are the same and not all ends are the same. And in the case of gun control, you have a chance where 99.9% of gun owners are effectively peaceful people that are just looking to defend themselves, whereas if you collapse borders, there is a 100% chance of your state collapsing into complete tyranny, a 100% chance of the welfare state collapsing, a 100% chance of your democracy being compromised, a 100% chance, in my opinion, of foreign cultures invading and destroying your culture.
Most of them were good things. I want democracy to collapse. I want the state to collapse. But your guesses about a 100% chance are exactly as useful as the liberals saying, if we don't disarm everybody, every tiny little car accident will end in a shootout. But their guess does not justify the initiation of violence. Neither does your guess justify the use of violence against millions of people you do not know, whose only sin is wanting to step across an imaginary line, the only significance of which is that it defines a piece of dirt that a frickin' ruling class claims as their territory.
As I said earlier, when I say the welfare state collapses, when I say our democracy collapses, I don't mean the state disappears, and I don't mean those institutions disappear. I mean they stop working as effectively, in the sense that we would all be living in a Venezuela-type situation if we had open borders and we had our governments repeatedly giving our money away. We would be in complete poverty and collapse, and the government would be far more totalitarian than it is now.
Did you just allege that the end of the welfare state causes poverty?
No, the end of the actual means that the welfare is being given out, when the resources are spread too thin, when the government is trying to give them to far too many people. No, the people's, when they're being redistributed.
How does my money disappear because somebody comes in and applies for government welfare and makes the welfare state fall over?
Because they up the fees, and then the government needs more money because they are having to give more into welfare.
Except that's not how it happens.
That's not how it happens? That's not how it works?
That's not how it works.
That's not how welfare works? We don't up the fees every year to make up for more and more immigrants coming in? Because last time I checked, the statistics agree with me.
Until people disobey. But it's interesting, this I didn't see coming. It's interesting that you're basically talking about the fall of the state as the scary thing we want to avoid. I don't give a crap about the welfare state.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying my first two reasons were neither of those things are going to happen.
Okay.
So in the real world, how do you intend on getting rid of borders? Do tell.
Stop aggression. And here's a novel idea. When someone commits aggression, let's say someone comes in from another country and commits aggression, use every means of violence necessary to stop that aggression. And I don't know why closed border people, and I'm not saying you, I haven't heard you do this in particular, but so often they say, well, obviously you want people being raped and attacked. No, I want violence used to stop actual aggressors, not people that you guess might in the future commit aggression, because that is a moral status.
Let me ask you something. Let's say you buy a house and you have a bunch of neighbors living around you, and your neighbors, you have an acre of property, they have a few acres of property, they're all living around you, and all your neighbors decide to invite over their friends from the Middle East, and they're all hardcore Muslims. What do you think's going to happen maybe a year or two from then when they decide? And none of those people agree with the NAP, by the way. None of those people agree with Western freedoms. In your area, what do you think's going to happen when they decide, oh, he's got a pretty nice water reserve there, he's got a pretty nice wife, he's got a pretty nice farm, some goats there. What do you think's going to happen to you?
They may try to attack, just like Americans may try to attack me.
Yeah, do you think you versus 500
That is, well,
Muslims
it's interesting that in your scenario, suddenly they outnumber me. What about the other 100
that's what
million
the
armed
statistics are
Americans?
happening right now. The statistics are that foreign cultures, the top name in Britain right now is actually Mohammed, fun fact.
500 to 1, you think they outnumber armed Americans 500 to 1?
No, I'm saying in your community. What about when armed Americans are not the majority?
If you make up a scenario and you say, what if a whole bunch of nasty people attack an innocent victim, he probably dies. That's a truism.
Right.
That doesn't make it okay to be the aggressor because you're guessing what somebody might do in the future. What happens if some crazy guy with a gun is in your
I'm not
neighborhood?
guessing. I'm not guessing. What's going to happen is people who believe in freedom are going to be outnumbered. They are the minority in this world. Look at yourselves right now. This is the minority.
Yes.
Only 1% of people are libertarians.
True.
And the rest of the world, outside of America, outside of Canada, they are far more totalitarian than you can ever imagine.
And you think that the answer is to not be a libertarian yourself. You are basically saying, I'm going to initiate violence. I'm going to advocate the initiation of violence, which you admitted, against millions of people you don't know, because we have to keep out the people who advocate the initiation of violence. That is insane.
Not all ends and means are equal. I want to protect my children, my grandchildren, and their futures. I want there to still be a free world that exists. I want there to still be Western culture. I still want that to exist 100, 200 years from now, and I'm not willing to purity spiral saying I will be the last libertarian left in America that becomes Somalia just because I want to look like a damn good libertarian. Would you watch your son drown just because he was on private property so you could say, look how pure I am?
No,
you would
nice
not.
Extreme ridiculous example, because I'm pretty sure the property
Why is that a
owner wouldn't
ridiculous
want me to
example?
either.
Would you violate the NAP to save your drowning child?
I would go on their property knowing they would do that.
So the ends justify the means.
You are making up a fabricated, bizarre thing to try to justify violence against millions of people. That freedom that you want for your son and all that.
How is that a fabricated, bizarre thing?
Do you want the same thing for the Mexican who wants to go into the U.S. because he thinks he can get a better life? Or does his freedom not frickin' matter?
You just admitted to me that in some cases it is okay to violate the NAP
in a
dependent on the
ridiculous
ends.
scenario in which the property owner would almost certainly approve. It's like the silly scenario of in the desert, you're crawling in the desert, you're dying of thirst, there's a house, nobody's home when you drink water. Yes, because I'm pretty freaking sure that I can make up for it to him and he would approve.
Great, well
it's
in a not so...
I'm gonna go murder somebody else's son to protect mine. That I wouldn't do.
In a not so ridiculous scenario where the West is truly headed towards collapse, where mass immigration is going to lead to the deterioration of our values, and where anyone with half a brain knows that places like France, if they continue the way they're going, are going to be under a literal Islamic caliphate, in a not so ridiculous and a very realistic scenario, I'm willing to violate the NAP in order to protect the last bit of freedom we may have left in this world. And sorry if I don't sound like a purist to you.
A, that is ridiculous. B, don't say our values. You initiate or you advocate the initiation of violence. I don't. We do not have the same values.
You would go over that property to get your son. You are just like me. You are just like me.
I am not. You want a gun pointed in the face of a Mexican family who thinks they might do better up there. I want to save my drowning son from somebody whose property owner would probably go, of course, save him.
You're saying...
Mine doesn't have a victim. Yours does.
That's not how the NAP works. And you can't say You can't say that I'm coming up with ridiculous scenarios when you're saying I want to go point guns in the face of Mexican children. That is
You
clearly
said that.
ridiculous.
You said that. Men with guns on the border.
Men
You
with
said
guns
that.
on the border, but that's not what happens, does it? Thousands of Somali, or Haitians rather, are coming over the Canadian border right now, and what's happening to them? If one of them had a gun put in their face, it would be an international story. People would go bizarre over it. That doesn't happen in real life, though. What happens is we're quite civil, thank
But it's
God.
what
Thank
you
God
advocate.
thank God they didn't walk over the non-existent borders of some Papua New Guinean tribe that would eat them because politics is downstream of culture. No, instead we bring them in, we process them, we check their background. A lot of them comply to legally come into the country. It isn't this ridiculous scenario of people just getting shot down at the border with flare guns by me.
No, because usually the threat of violence is enough. It's like saying, well, taxes are voluntary because most people pay up before they get put in a cage. They're not voluntary. And this isn't about what's happening. It's about you, what you want to have happen. Is what you advocate, is the initiation of violence.
I can reductio ad absurdum yourself as well, and we can go into the whole, if I buy property all around your land, are you allowed to leave? Can I starve you to death in there? We can do the whole ANCAP debate and run into the theoretical, but once again, I want to go back to the beginning. My argument is, in the current state that we're at now, borders are extremely helpful when we have the current state of anarchy, where there are foreign powers that could come in and invade your land if we got rid of borders, where we have the welfare state and where we have democracy. What would you do about it right at this moment, and not in this theoretical world of what is and what is not just to
I
you?
would tell Americans to be armed and understand self-defense and get
How does that get rid of the borders?
aggression.
How does that get rid of the borders?
And get rid of the violent aggression by ending the borders immediately.
Immediately.
Yes, immediately, because they are immoral now. You don't phase out evil, you oppose it.
All right, and which party is going to do this?
Neither, obviously.
Neither, so who's going to do it?
No one.
Right, because you guys are busy doing these ridiculous theoretical
We're
debates
busy
where you sit
advocating
here and
what
get
is
nothing
moral.
done in the real political realm. If you want to talk about actual policy changes that can be made to maybe get rid of the border and have the country succeed, we can do that. Or you can just sit in your little theoretical realm of bizarre scenarios where we get rid of the freaking border and everyone just has a gun and decides, woo, freedom. I want that. I love that. That sounds great, but it's not going to happen in the real world, Larken.
It will. Do you know how many anarchists I knew 10 years ago? 3.
Great, and now you know 4.
Do the math. 10 more years, we don't need the frickin' politicians' permission to do anything.
It's been... All right. I mean, that's a great observation in your own life, but everyone has been highly reporting, and this has been highly analyzed, that most libertarians are actually moving over to the far right because of the scenario where they realize that
Utterly false.
their borders are protecting the little freedom they have left. And they recognize what this is going to end up as if you get rid of the borders and you let the third world and people with very different values come into your country.
I do appreciate you giving a perfect example of what I said, which is that you advocate violence when it serves your interest and advocate freedom
Yes.
when it serves your interest.
Yes, me and my people and my country and my nation and my family. I want them to live.
Yeah, and that's the position of every statist everywhere.
Fine.
If
Fine.
someone else, if somebody, let's say some scary foreigners, advocate coming over, using violence and stealing your stuff, serves their interest, doesn't work too well for yours.
Well, thank goodness
what
I have
in
the American
principle-
military and Canadian military on my side, the big guys with guns that don't suck as much as the rest.
Actually, they're pretty damn bad, and they're too busy blowing
Hey, I
up
don't
brown
deny
people on the other side of the
they're all
world.
monsters, they're all gangs, but if you've got a choice between 3 gangs, one that kind of sucks, one that really sucks, and one that is completely ineffective and can't do anything, I'm going to choose the one that kind of sucks.
Wait,
Sorry.
do you actually believe that the United States government, including the United States military, is less of a threat to the freedom of Americans than some brown people on the other side of the world?
Hey, at least they're not going to throw me off a roof for being gay.
Answer the question. Do you think the U.S. government is less of a threat to the freedom of the American people than Muslims on the other side of the world?
Yes,
That's insane.
absolutely. Like I said, I'm not going to be stoned to death for being raped in America.
So you think that Muslims can come over here if they're not perceived as authority, they're not perceived as government, and could run a racket that steals trillions of dollars every year from 100 million armed
Larken,
Americans?
where does
You really
government come
think
from?
It comes from people's stupid belief in authority.
Right, where do stupid people come from?
Being born and then raised into authoritarianism.
Right. So they come from authoritarian cultures. And there are cultures that are more authoritarian. Politics is downstream of culture. And if you invite a whole heck of a lot more stupid people into your country, you're going to get a lot stupider of a government.
Guess what? 99% of the people here are already statists, including you.
Right,
the
let's give up
problem
some
is
more.
not
Right.
the brown people over there who might advocate statism. It's the mostly white people in the U.S. right now who advocate my enslavement, including you, because you support the government.
There are varying degrees of aggression, whether you like it or not. It's not just all under the umbrella of statism. Just like I said, I would much rather be in a country with a massive government where when I'm going through the border and going into the country, maybe I have to wait 30 minutes. It sucks. Don't get me wrong. I don't like going through border lines. They piss me right off. Maybe do a whole little pat down, whatever. I get through and I can go have a few drinks with my friend. I go somewhere in Papua New Guinea where they have no borders. Great. I don't have to wait in that 30-minute line, but I get in there and they're probably going to friggin' eat me. That's the reality. It doesn't matter if there's a government or not. It depends on how the people are. The politics is determined by the culture. And we are walking a very thin line right now of how much totalitarianism we can invite into this country. You're right, we already have way too many to deal with within our borders. Let's not bring the rest in. Let's try to convert the ones within our borders and maintain a state of freedom, maybe even try to expand it before we just collapse the whole thing and welcome the Kali Yuga.
You can't convert them because you don't advocate freedom. You advocate violence that serves your interests.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, you're saying let's convert the ones that are here. You're one of them. You're a statist. You're not there yet.
I still want you to have your free speech. There are varying degrees of statism. There are varying degrees of aggression.
You want me to have this freedom.
I want you to have free speech. I want taxes to be nearly cut to nothing. I want capitalism. I want most of the things you want. But because you've got these purist libertarians that aren't even willing to move an inch, that's why a lot of people won't join your community.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of people won't come and vote libertarian.
Violence against innocent people, I absolutely won't buff it.
Great, you can sit alone and you can be the last man in friggin' America, Somalia, where you have no freedoms. That's fine, you can sit there with your gun.
Does it seem like
I
I'm
don't care.
alone?
You can get some cheers at an anarchist convention, but you try anywhere else. I love these people. I think they're great people, but...
The fascinating thing here is, by the way, I totally agree on one point that I have to say every once in a while because some people just imagine I don't know this. I'm totally aware of the fact that a lot of cultures and a lot of places are very much more pro-violence. They don't have as much emphasis on individual freedom or don't have any. They have all sorts of rituals and cultural things about oppression, oppressing women, oppressing children, all over the place. I completely acknowledge that. But the idea that the solution to that is a different flavor of violent aggression, as if that teaches something, or as if advocating that and putting a big authoritarian wall and men with guns on it is the path to freedom, is ridiculous. If you are not advocating freedom, you don't get to freedom.
Sometimes there are worse paths and there are better paths. This is the problem. You are so purist. You are so stuck in statism. This is exactly what I was talking about in my intro. You are going to be stuck arguing the theoretical till the day you die, and your kids are not going to have a stick of freedom if we continue the way we're going. And you don't actually go into the government and try to make change. If you don't actually go into the culture and try to make change, you're busy theorizing around a bunch of people that agree with you.
This may sound like bragging, and right now I don't care. Thousands of people have said I helped them escape the cult of statism. When thousands of other people are doing that, it becomes millions. Then you don't need legislation. Then you don't need government solution. Then you don't need borders. And if you are promoting violent aggression, if you are promoting statism, saying we need to do this for now, to get freedom in the end, that is fear-based cowardice. It is what statism is always based on. Statism is always sold as, here are the horrible things that will happen if you don't give them the power to protect you. And the end result is always the same, less freedom.
Well, when you're... When your great-grandson Mohammed is getting thrown off a roof for loving another man, he can at least know that his great-grandpa was a purist and he didn't wreck his ideals, did he?
See, your imaginary fear-based scenarios don't change the principle, and they don't scare me. And it's funny to me how
That's
many
because you don't have to
people-
deal with them, because men who built borders, you're living in them. Because men who built freedoms and fought for freedoms
I'm in Mexico.
set the stage
I'm
for
in
you to be able to
Mexico.
travel here, for you to be able to have the
I'm
freedom.
on the other side of the frickin'
and
wall,
money
and I'm not
to be able to do
scared
that.
because the people here are
Sorry,
nicer
but if
and
you
allow
were
me
born-
more freedom than the friggin' Americans who vote.
If you were born in Papua New Guinea or Somalia, you would not be on this stage today. If you were born in Papua New Guinea or Somalia, you would not be on this stage because you would not have the economic freedom, you would not have the life freedom, you would never even hear these freaking ideas. But because you were blessed and born in a country where people protected their borders and their culture and their history, you now are allowed to be sitting on the stage in Mexico.
So violent aggression is why I now oppose violent aggression?
Sorry?
So violent aggression is why I now oppose violent aggression. That's
No, you
basically what you're
oppose
saying.
violent aggression because people made sure you were free enough to have these opinions and find these
You
opinions.
think
People
the
who fought.
government made sure
No,
I was
I'm not
free.
saying the government, I'm saying men. Governments are made up of individuals. I am a huge promoter of culture. Politics is downstream of culture. When you say government, it's like this boogeyman you guys talk about, but no, it's people. These are individuals. It's a civilization that creates a government. And if you think open borders is suddenly going to stop government from existing, no, you're just going to have a bunch of people come in and they're going to become 60% of the population and build their own government. It doesn't matter.
It's not about
It's
what
the culture.
It's not about what guessing is going to happen. It's like arguing over the gun control debate and say, well, if we don't have gun control, all sorts of people are going to get shot. We're going to be dying all over the place. That guess doesn't matter. And
Right.
whether it's true doesn't even matter. If gun control would have stopped one murder, it doesn't mean it was okay to violently disarm a million other people. Just like if there's some scary person who's going to get in because we don't have a border guard and he's going to do something bad, that doesn't mean it was okay to initiate violence against all the people who weren't doing that.
Because of the NAP, correct? The
Because
non-aggression
of moral
principle.
principles.
Oh, you keep saying moral principles, assuming we all agree.
Oh, I know we don't agree.
Well, you keep saying it throughout this whole conversation as if it's a given.
And if I can interrupt for just a moment, how are they doing, by the way? Yes, you two are great. And by the way, we want to make sure we each have 2 minutes at the end to respond.
Yes.
And we have some wonderful people lined up there that have some questions for you. Would you be open to entertaining some questions?
Of course.
We have time.
That's right.
yeah.
And couldn't we go about 15 or 16 hours more on this one? You betcha. Okay, now, by the way, those of you asking questions, we don't have much time. We need it really, really short.
No problem.
Don't tell us a story, just really, really short, like about
Sure.
10 seconds. Go.
My question is for Larken. I'm a Bible-believing anarchist, and I happen to know about the United Nations plan for mass Islamic immigration, which is already taking place in Europe, and it's coming here in my state of Minnesota. So I can understand and respect that you would like open borders, but I don't want Chinatown in my town. I want to go visit Chinatown in Chinatown.
So what is your question?
Was there a question?
My question is, are you aware of the satanic United Nations paying for mass immigration? Are you aware of that?
Larkin?
First of all, obviously it's not okay for government to pay for anything, including immigration. Second of all, the fact that some psycho's agenda...
We're talking mass immigration, not just one or two people. Mass
Sir?
immigration.
Please let him answer
The
the question.
fact that somebody's political agenda happens to work better by allowing one piece of freedom and advocating other violence doesn't mean the thing that should change is the one piece of freedom. It means the thing that should change is the rest of the violence of their agenda.
Thank you. Next question.
First, Larken, I've followed you for years and consider you a brother and a hero of this movement, but by the time I'm done talking, I'll probably be subject to your ad hominem attacks as well. What are you going to do about the transition? We all agree we want to end up at this happy anarchotopia, and I think it's going to be less than 10 years before cryptocurrency puts...
Okay.
What are
Thank
you going to do about
the transition? Thank you.
Born in
Larkin, what will
captivity
you do about the
animals that
transition?
are never going to be able to feeding themselves? You love humanity.
Excuse us, sir.
We don't have that plan.
Larkin,
We have neither the means nor the right to slowly transition between evil and good. You advocate what is right now.
Next.
considering, this is for Larkin, considering the fact that the political left in the United States has designed its immigration policy to support leftist and statist ideology, how would you pragmatically end immigration, but while still preserving and furthering the concepts of liberty?
Is that a question for Larkin?
For Larkin, but it's open to Lauren as well.
Okay, we'll get one for you eventually.
One day.
It's basically what I said before. If somebody advocates this piece of freedom in part of an agenda that's mostly violent, you resist the violence. You don't resist the one piece of freedom.
Next question.
Hi.
Quick question.
Hi. I believe that people have a right to stay whatever you want if you pay rent or you own the property anywhere in the world. My question to the Lauren is that if your country becomes so poor, and if your kids are starving, if your parents have no medication, and you want to immigrate to other country, but if in that point there's a border you cannot cross, do you still believe that condition border is good for you?
Thank you.
Sorry, can you rephrase the question?
Can you rephrase the question quickly in
Okay,
about 5
if-
I
seconds?
zoned out. I'm so sorry.
U.S. is a rich country right now, but if U.S. collapse and become like Venezuela, and there's a border, you want to migrate it because to other country. Yeah, I'm asking question right now. If there's a border to go, your kids is starving, your parents has no medicine in the country, and you have to go other country, richer country, to make your family better, then still, but there's a border you cannot cross. Do you still believe the border at that time?
Do you still believe the border should not be
Do I
crossed
still
by those
believe in
people?
the border in that case? Well, I would like to think that there would be people who would come out and aid. Like in the refugee crisis, for example, I was extremely pro people within the Islamic world helping out the refugees from Syria. And they had plenty and plenty of tents there built up in tons of countries, yet for some reason, places like the EUA, they would not accept migrants. A lot of the Syrian refugees ended up being fake refugees. So real refugees, in the case of those, individuals funding and sponsoring those into their countries and doing it through legal means, I think is a good thing, absolutely. But I don't agree with the mass importation of fake migrants that is happening right now in both Europe, America, and the Americas.
All right, we have time for one quick question, one last quick question.
Yeah, I know what his question.
Lauren, 20 years ago, I would be your biggest fan, but then two things happened. I served 5 years in allied corpses of an army, and I traveled 100 countries. So my question to you, how many of those so-called dangerous places have you actually visited? Because my experience, especially from Muslim countries, is that we have the same human heart, and everybody on this planet wants the same thing, and there is not us versus them. So how many of those countries that you call dangerous have you traveled? Because I've been to many dangerous countries, and it's been excellent experience.
Thank you.
I love
Lauren,
those people.
how many countries have you traveled to?
How
that you're
many
talking
countries
about?
have I traveled to? I have never denied once in my life that there are kind people in every culture, of every skin color, of every persuasion. There are absolutely. I've met some lovely people from every country in the world. I have not visited Muslim countries, thank God. But I know exactly what happens in the cultures where they come to. I visited the enclaves in Molenbeek. I just got back from South Africa where I was talking to the families of people who had their mother's eyes gouged out and their cheeks cut up to here and tortured for days. I have
Please
been
let him
places
speak.
where there are horrors that happen because of the culture there. And you can see that transmitting to our culture in America and Europe. And no, I will not accept this ploy that I somehow think everyone is evil and horrible because of their skin color, and I somehow think every individual is like that. That is absolutely untrue, but it is how the culture is en masse. And you can look at the Pew Research on what people support, whether they support killing gays. You can look at the Pew Research on whether people support female genital mutilation. You can look at that. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to go there and have it happen to you yourself.
All right, okay, well, we have time right now for their final closing statements. We've agreed beforehand, 2 minutes each for their statement, and yes, we will have 2 minutes, so do it. So which of you would choose to go first?
I think we had a schedule that I go first and
Okay,
you
then
get
that's
to go
fine
last.
with me.
If we are to spread the ideas of freedom, we have to advocate the ideas of freedom. If there is some person who hasn't thought about things much, which is true of most of the people in the world in every country, and they want to come to the US, and there are men with guns saying, you can't come in here, our politician said you can't. Do you think that teaches them about freedom? Do you think that teaches them that our culture is great and tolerant and it's about freedom and peaceful coexistence? Or does it teach them that, yeah, we believe in violence too? We believe in aggression too, just like everybody else. We believe in us versus them. We believe we're going to protect our pack, and hell with you. You matter less. Your rights matter less. Violent aggression against you is okay because, hey, ends justify the means sometimes, and it's necessary and all that. Yes, the path from here to a free society will have ugliness in it because some people believe in violence and want to violently control others. The best thing we can do on the path to there is don't be the people who advocate violence against others.
Thank you.
Got it?
Thank you. Lauren, your final
Absolutely.
2 minutes.
So to finish this off, yes, I am arguing for the best of the worst. That is my position. Yes, I am arguing for some government in order to defend the maximum amount of freedom possible. And yes, I am going against the formal philosophy of what anarchy or even libertarianism may look like on text. I am arguing for the long line of men with guns that say, stay the hell out of my nation if you don't like our values. But that's because I am not here to engage with a book club, nor am I here to play around with people's unicorn fantasy worlds where we just magically disband the state without catastrophic consequences. I want a government small enough to drown in a bathtub. But as someone to the right of the political spectrum, I've come to realize that what we want and what is possible are two very different things. I am here to defend truth, not theory. I am here to defend reality and not purity. You can call me all the names you want in the book. Racist, like some guy over here, doesn't change the fact that blacks commit a disproportionate amount of crime. You can call me a sexist. It doesn't make biology not matter. You can call me an Islamophobe. It won't get rid of all of the verses in Quran calling for murder. Or you can call me a statist. It won't change the fact that open borders are a damn pipe dream that will lead to a catastrophic collapse of our freedoms and values and society. My interests, my family, my friends, my history, my culture, my tradition, and my freedom, they still exist in this world to some extent. And I am going to fight for that world, and I'm going to argue in favor of the best solutions for that world in the realm of reality. And I don't give a damn what you call me. So thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren.
Are we done here?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we could go long, and we want to thank both of our guests here. Larken and Lauren, thank you so much for being here. And here's what we're going to do, if it would be all right with you. We have several people that still have questions. We also are scheduled to break for lunch. So we know many of you might have commitments already for lunch, or you need to go. However, if it would be all right with the two of you, and it's completely up to you, we could take a few more questions while others who have a previous commitment could go to lunch or stay here to answer a few more. It's your call. Larken, Lauren, what do you think?
I'm up for it. Also,
All right, we
thank
are
you for the
officially
debate.
then adjourning for lunch. And if you want to hang around and have some fun, you're welcome to join us.
I would
And
also.
we have some questions right there. Lauren,
Am I
did
still
you
on? I would also say the main speakers are faced away from us. It's sort of hard for us to hear the questions. So if you can enunciate and scream less and enunciate more, that would help.
Yes. At least a peaceful interaction.
My question, I'm from Germany. I experience all the migration problems we face, and also from Islam point of view. I have been to Tunisia for several years because my stepfather comes from there. I know this culture quite good, and I know how big danger it is, and the problems that I have, and I am quite with you, Lauren, that when I discuss with libertarians, with anarchists, the problems we face always is that there are always these theoretical discussions, but you have to be realistic. And my question is, what is the realistic solution for this mass immigration problems we face all over Germany, all over Europe, where we have military people marching on the streets. We have attacks on women. We have rapings and everything on a mass scale.
Well, that's one thing that people don't realize is this open border policy that we can already see happening in Europe with the Schengen zone is leading to more militarization, more government, and far more government spending than ever before. And it's catastrophic what's happening to the people there. I know you were saying, some man accused me of not understanding what other countries are like. You're saying you've been there, you've experienced it, you know how tyrannical the culture and the governments can be. And I'd say the way that we can do it right now would be to, first of all, actually enforce those borders. The Schengen zone, I thought, was a very good idea when they weren't allowing people from cultures that were antithetical to freedom in. You could go and trade with people, go across from Poland to wherever, right? And it was great. However, now that the Schengen zone has changed so much and people have been allowed in, you must enforce those borders again. And unfortunately, it looks like at the right now, it is going to have to happen through a rude awakening of more terrorism, more death, more militarization, and just the complete and utter collapse of Europe. I hope it doesn't get to that, but that seems to be what's waking people up.
My,
By the way, one thing that we wanted to do is before everyone leaves, we had a request for a vote on which side you favor or both. We have actually three choices. There were those saying they would favor Larken, others saying they favor Lauren, and others say, I agree with portions of both. So by a round of applause, how many of you would agree with Larken?
slightly slanted
And
audience.
how many would agree with Lauren? And a very important nuance, how many of you found agreement from both of them? Very interesting. And our next question, please. Very short question.
Why shouldn't be a private security company in a private city on a private street more effective than a government?
And who would you want to answer that?
Sorry?
Who should answer that?
Lauren.
Lauren.
Was that,
Private company
what was the first
in a
part? Was that
private-
why would it be?
Why should be a government more effective against mass immigration than a private security company in a private city on private streets
Actually,
A
with
private-
self-armed people?
oh, sorry, did you want to go? You can go.
I think it was for you.
Oh, it was for you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear right.
No, I actually think that there has been some success in that realm. For example, you have a guy named Dinko Valev on the border of Hungary who bought himself a tank and some ATVs and a helicopter, and he goes around patrolling the borders, driving people back into Turkey. So that's a completely private one going on there. But as you can see, I took part in something called Defend Europe, where we're trying to prevent the mass importation of illegal migrants from North Africa, and the state police tried to stop us. They wouldn't let our private boat land anywhere within EU borders. They detained us for a while, even detained us at the airport. So they won't even allow you to defend your property. This is the thing. A lot of people have pointed it out. This mass immigration is something the state wants, and it is going to lead to more statism.
All right. By the way, before we get another, those of you that are not joining us for the Q&A, if you're talking, we would encourage you, please keep talking, but do it outside. Please take your conversations outside if you want to continue talking, so we can have a little bit more quiet here and listen. Thank you. Thank you. And I think we have, Larken, did you have something you wanted to
I
add?
had a quick follow-up to two of them. The very short answer to the person who was a couple questions ago is the answer to what's happening in Germany is have an armed populace able and willing to use defensive force, and their government is in the way. If your government is in your way, disobey your frickin' government and get a gun.
All right, our next question.
My question is for Lauren. You said two things about government that one I agreed with and one I didn't agree with, and I want you to clarify. The first thing that you said that I agreed with was that governments aren't a thing, they're a collection of individuals.
Yeah.
And that governments were created by a collection of individuals. So did you concede that you made those points? So then later, when Larken brought up the point about just disregarding the borders, when you posed the question, well, what do we do? How do we stop the government and how do we disarm the borders? You said, well, we can't just magically stop the borders. We can't just magically disarm the government. But a few points earlier, you said that we magically created the government because we're a bunch of individuals. So I want to know, basically, can you explain that paradox to me and how it makes any sense?
It's not a paradox because we can't just, that's exactly it. We can't just magically dissolve something created by a group of people that all agree it should exist unless somehow we change all of their minds, right? You have to actually reach out to the populace in a reasonable way, and that's one of the great criticisms I have of libertarians and anarchists is they tend to stick to their book clubs theorizing and not talking about actual policies, and that's what convinces people is actual policy changes we can make. They look at that and say, wow, that's not so bad, but instead we say, let's just dissolve it all right away. You're a statist piece of crap, racist garbage, whatever, if you don't agree with this, and no one likes to hear that. They want to be convinced in a real world way. So I understand, I think I understand your question.
I think you misinterpreted it. By that, you kind of proved the paradox.
You have to change the culture. No. Government was created because of a culture that
so
wanted
how did
a
that
government.
It was happened by the same means that we can disarm government? That's the question.
It wasn't magically created. Government, no. It came out, sorry.
Can I do a very short follow-up question, even though that's not what we're doing? Do you believe when the people of the United States on whole approved of and condoned and legalized slavery, should they have opposed it in principle or gradually tried to change the policies? Should they have disobeyed or tried to petition for different laws?
If people didn't come out, and slavery wasn't actually what the Civil War was completely about. I hope you understand that. It came about through people making gradual suggestions and gradual changes to be made. It didn't happen instantly. You had periods of time where you still had Jim Crow laws. Like, to think it happened instantly and everyone was just instantly given perfectly the same rights is ridiculous. Of course it happened slowly. I'm not saying that's how things should happen. I'm saying that's how things do happen.
The abolitionists were not saying over the next 50 years we need to phase this out. We're saying this is wrong now. It took a long time before enough people understood that. It sounds like you're saying, I don't want to oppose it in principle now. I want to oppose a gradual phasing out of what is immoral.
That is completely inaccurate.
Okay. Then in slavery days, would you in principle say, regardless of what the majority wants, regardless of what the policies are, slavery is wrong, I oppose it?
Right, but I wouldn't just sit in a conference with 10 people and say, or a book club with 10 people and say, this is wrong, let's talk about things that are never going to have any impact in the real world and actually stopping slavery. No, you had to have politicians come out and make change and start actually voting for things and making things that were reasonable in the public's eye for that to happen.
Do you believe the politicians ended slavery and not the abolitionists who disobeyed it?
It was still a gradual thing. Even many of the people that were part of the abolitionists still had views that people would consider absolutely unacceptable and disgusting today. Like, these are people, it doesn't matter. There are a lot of things in this world I don't want to happen, that I disagree with, but I'm more of a reactionary, if anything. I am the defender of what is possible and what is true and what is fact, and not what I want things to be.
All right, I think we can go on that one for a while.
Yeah.
Very good thought. Next question, short.
That was a great so far. Thank you very much. My question is, if we have the border that is defined by a government, then this implies that the property behind this border is 100% owned by the government. And I would fundamentally disagree. I think there's something called private property and private property in land specifically. And that is really important. And if you have a piece of land and you do want to have people on that piece of land, it's your fundamentally right to do so. And on the other side, if you decide not to have people of whatever race or color, if you do not want to have those people on your private property, you can definitely exclude them. But who are you? What is your fundamental right to force me to do with my property what I do not want to do? Why do you force me to do something with my property there?
I know the theories of the non-aggression principle. I understand that a lot of you here disagree with me. And what is my right to do that? I'm not doing anything to you. I'm not the government. I'm not the state. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just advocating what I think is going to preserve more freedom in the future. So.
All right. Thank you. Our next question.
Great debate. Larken, I posted your You Gotta Vote song a couple of years ago on Steam It. and I made $50 from it and sent it to you. But anyway, because anarchy is important to me, there are two pillars that I want to quibble over. One is the non-aggression principle. It's not a principle of nature. It is an experiment and an agreement. And I think calling it a principle elevates it higher than it really is. The second is self-ownership. I agree that no human owns another human, but if you say you own yourself, then the question becomes who owns the self that owns the self? So I'd just like your comments on those 2 points.
Yeah, I'll start with the second one. I know a bunch of people sort of, I'm not saying using this term to sound mean, but they sort of nitpick over the term self-ownership, and I kind of understand why. To me, it's just a very short, succinct thing that almost everybody, like all the normal people, can understand. Yeah, I belong to myself. And you can say, well, if it's ownership, then can you? There are longer ways to express it, to like clarify between, well, can you sell yourself into slavery and things like that. But to me, it just makes a convenient shorthand thing. And if people want elaboration and going over the details, there's that. Same thing with the non-aggression principle, actually. There's weird situations in which, yeah, you should like save your drowning son in the neighbor's pond when he's not home, because there isn't a victim. And so a bunch of these are sort of shorthand things, and yeah, there are areas where they don't all the way add up and you have to elaborate and clarify, but they make a lot more convenient ways to get people to get the general point.
Okay, next question.
My question is to Lauren. I love how you talk about American culture. You are very enthusiastic about it, right? But this same culture, 100 years ago, was built in the land of the brave and the home of the free by people who crossed the Atlantic on boats to come here and settle. And they are the ones who built this culture. And now you want to keep people out with guns at the borders to defend the culture built by people who came here to be free. I see a hypocrisy in that. What do you
There's
think?
no hypocrisy there whatsoever. Europeans have created some of the most free societies on earth. Came from a myriad of things. Some people say it's because the northern areas caused them to have a higher time preference. Some people say it was the Christian ethics, which Christianity is more of a religion where you choose whether to allow Jesus into your heart or not, versus something like Islam, which is about submission. There are a myriad of reasons for why Europeans have created more free societies, but it is a completely different situation. Europeans coming over on boats versus an Islamic culture coming over on boats. So there's no hypocrisy there whatsoever.
It always strikes me as sort of strange when people of European descent say, we have an exclusive right to be in North America.
I never said that.
I know, but lots of people do. If you're defending, this is our Western culture, you're in North America. If you came from Europe and you're so proud about soil and land and blood, go the fuck back where you came from.
Right, well, you're talking about people that are more patriots. They're not really talking about blood and soil.
Patriots of what?
More
That's
identitarians in
loyalty to a
Europe talk
ruling
about
class.
blood and soil. The patriots would say they created a very different Western culture than a lot of European countries. I mean, you look at it, it's more, if you're talking about like Croatians, for example, they love their Catholicism, they love their history, whereas America has more Protestant history. People would say that actually a lot of Americans were based from bloodlines where people were more adventurous because they were willing to take this long journey to a new land. So they have a different culture than Europe, you realize.
To claim that a culture from European descent has an exclusive right to North America is just bizarre.
So wait, you think that
the whole blood
America
and soil
should
thing,
not,
this
North
isn't
America
your soil
should not
and it
be
isn't where
under
your blood
Western
came
culture?
from.
You think that Western culture hasn't made America far more prosperous than the rest of the world?
Aspects of it certainly have. It also committed genocide, and it's
Like every
interesting the
group
things
on
that get
Earth?
left out of that.
Like every group on Earth, except we don't recognize those ones, right? Because we're not allowed to recognize
No,
genocide
I
or slavery by
absolutely
non-whites.
condemn that.
That's
See, I don't pick a
unacceptable.
whole pack and say my pack is good and your pack is bad.
No one's
I
saying
pick
that.
principles
No one's
and say
saying that.
when white people commit aggression, it's bad. When brown people commit aggression, it's bad.
No one is
when they
saying that.
peacefully coexist, that's good.
No one is saying any of those
Let's go on.
things
We have another
here.
question.
Yeah, I think the real issue here is not over open borders or closed borders. It's over who controls the land. Is
Yes.
land and infrastructure controlled by private property owners, or is it controlled by government? Now, unfortunately, I would like to live in an anarcho-capitalist society. An anarcho-capitalist society does not mean open borders. It means private property borders. Private property and freedom of association. Freedom of association also means freedom to disassociate with whoever you want to for whatever reason. So what we're talking about here is how the public commons and public infrastructure of the land territory that we live in, known as the United States of America, should be used.
Okay, and what is your
the
question,
real
sir?
issue
Sir?
is to
Sir?
privatize
What is your
everything and
question?
abolish the state.
Sir? Hello? What is
That's
your question?
the real issue
Real quick.
because
Your question.
Okay. So
Nice
just because the
presentation. We want
government
a question.
is controlling a function doesn't necessarily invalidate the function. The government runs fire departments, okay? So if your house catches on fire, are you going to sit there? I'm getting the question. Are you going to sit there and say, well, no, I'm not going to be a statist. I'm going to be a purist. And I'm not going to have the government fire department come over. So
Okay, hold on. That's a good question. Larken, how would you answer that question that he just
Okay,
asked?
so basically,
Hold on. We want to keep moving on for other people too. Please.
Basically, do you favor
Please,
abolishing
sir,
the state
sir,
and
sir,
converting everything
sir,
over to
hello,
private property,
hello,
allowing private
hello,
property
sir,
owners to
can
regulate
we-
the land
sir,
and migration
hello?
policy?
Larken, I'll leave that one to you first, and then Lauren will let you respond if you'd like.
Private property is absolutely legitimate, and people can individually or in a group do what you said. Freedom of association includes freedom of disassociation. But the notion that anybody or any group has a claim on half of North America is ridiculous. What if I want to let somebody on my property who's on the other side of the world? Collectivists and authoritarians and pro-borders people are basically saying, I don't get to choose who's on my frickin' property because somehow there's some big collective ownership of this thing represented by a ruling class and they get to decide who can be on my property. That's bogus.
I think private property is great. I think private property rights are amazing. All I'm saying is that if you've got a bunch of people with their private property around your private property who don't believe in private property, it's not going to be your property for very long. It's going to be their private property, which is not going to be a good time. And that's going to be most of Europe and America, given the way we're going.
All right, thank you. Next question, please.
Great debate. Thank you. I've been a libertarian for half of my life. Nobody hates the government more than I do, I promise you. But sometimes it sounds as if libertarians will say, we don't believe in aggression. We define the state as aggression. And the people who believe in borders are, how can we change the world if all we do is stand on our principles when the rest of the world, vast majority, don't necessarily agree with our principles?
Fair question.
How are we going to convince the rest of them? How are we going to convince?
Fair question. Thank you, sir. Larken, I'll turn that over to you, and then Larken.
The way to change the world is to spread the principles, not play different political games.
Lauren, any comments?
You can't if you just simply stand on your purist ideas. The fact of the matter is, even if I move to a different country right now that has completely different values than me, they don't believe in free speech, they don't believe in property rights, they think I have to wear a burqa, whatever it may be, no matter how hard I try to assimilate to that, I'm not going to be able to, because I was born and bred and grown up in a culture that believes in freedom. The only way to do this is really, like a gentleman in the crowd said, Western culture. We need to preserve a culture that promotes freedom. It has to be something people grow up in, they live in. And if you import so many people that don't believe in that, they will become the new culture. It has to be something people are inundated with constantly, and that is not going to happen by being purists who don't allow for any wiggle room for the rest of society to join in some of our ideas.
Thank you. Next question.
Say thank you for a very well-argued debate. I definitely have points I agree with on both sides. And I just wanted to offer, I'll get your thoughts on a third proposal, which would be crowdfund an entirely new country, 3D print a bunch of houses, solar panels that can grow our food and purify water in totally new areas where it could be cheaply done, and then it goes beyond theorizing. We can just build a totally new community. People go there if you align with the values of whoever is there, and we can serve as an example of brand new decentralized community. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm like any arrangement of actual private property that's, legitimately acquired, not this continent looks nice, it's mine, I'm all in favor of it. I'm in favor of people trying it 1,000 different ways, and they can put a big wall around it if they want. I'm staying at a hotel that has walls and men with guns to decide who goes in there. That's perfectly legitimate, works quite well. I was told I was supposed to be all scared of Acapulco when I came down. I'm not. It's a really nice place. It's less scary than Philadelphia that I live right next to, because I'm not a drug dealer or a cop. So of course there's a million ways people can arrange, and they can try a million things. Some can work, some can't. What we don't have the right to do is say, I'm going to decide for everyone on half of this continent what we're going to do and who's going to be allowed to come into your community or who's not, and try to dictate. And it strikes me as strange how often the alt-right complains about communists when they are absolutely authoritarian collectivists. The entire argument is based on the notion that the collective owns this. It doesn't.
You know, that's how most nations were started, a tribe of people going somewhere and saying, let's create our own place where we can do what we want. That's how America, a bunch of people came over there on boats, a bunch of people came to a lot of places. But you know what happens when you create something really damn good? A lot of people want to come there, and people vote with their feet. And eventually, when too many people want to come there, especially people who don't have the same ideas as you, that didn't create such a great culture as you got to build a wall to keep them out, to keep your place so great. And that's what happened over and over and over again throughout history.
All right, our next question.
I just want to agree, yeah. If we did do that, I think it should have a closed border.
My question is for Laura.
Yep.
It's safe to say that the rise and fall of organizations is inevitable. Is your idea of border control having 100% faith that the organization of border control will not resort to taking advantage of this power in order to sustain itself, or that people are obligated to cling to it in order to stay safe?
Sorry, can you say that a little slower, rephrase a little simpler?
It's safe to say the rise and fall of organizations is inevitable.
Yes.
Is your idea that of border control having 100% faith that the border control organization that runs it will not resort to taking advantage of this power in order to sustain itself, or that people are obligated to cling to it in order to stay safe?
Right. Well, that's the great dilemma of being human, isn't it? Whether you are creating a government or a stateless society. Will these people decide one day they want to create a state? Will gangs form? Will your government go rogue? Will your border institution go rogue or collapse? You never know. So this is why I'm a big...
It wasn't really as much as just the state itself. Like, say that they have border control and then I want to go somewhere else from my country, take a vacation, and then I have this border control and that says it's protecting my freedom, then all of a sudden they're doing weird things like rummaging through my things and things I question, and then I'm like, well, why are they doing this? And they're funding themselves and they're starting to do shiesty things in order to keep themselves, because they're so scared.
And I don't disagree. This is what I say when we've already got enough statists within our borders right now that we need to deal with. I don't disagree that I think that sometimes people within borders go too far. They do things that are completely unnecessary. Like, come on, guys. The 90-year-old lady going through in her wheelchair is not a terrorist. You don't have to pat her down. Like, let's relax here, right? But I will say I think some level is necessary, and hopefully you have a culture that believes in freedom enough that they won't continue to push these policies, because we vote for governments that put in these policies. We form up governments that create these policies. So this is why I am a big advocate of a culture being pro-freedom, because if you don't have the culture with you, then you won't have the government or the institutions.
Okay, our next question.
You both are awesome, and I'm still on the ends of this argument.
Pull the microphone down, please. So we can hear you. Thank you.
My question is for Larken. I'm asking about how Lauren says that you're theorizing the situation. What are some real-life ideas of how open borders would work? For example, if America became an anarchist state, borders were dropped, other countries still have government in place and could establish rule. Not only is that an issue, but what other ideas would you have about disease control and invasive species?
That last part was hard to hear. Like I said, the mains are facing away from us.
Okay. I just said, if America became an anarchist state, borders were dropped, other countries still have government in place and could establish rules. So what are your ideas on how to solve that? And also disease control and invasive species, what are some ideas that you would have about open borders with that?
Yeah, if the U.S. stopped being the U.S. and started being a free place that without a ruling class, first of all, there wouldn't be a big draw for the welfare state, because there isn't any. The people who would go there would be looking for freedom. And in a population that doesn't believe in politics and government and ruling classes, if somebody comes in and says, we're going to put a ruling class over you, everyone there says, no, you're not. And if you try to rule us by force, we will resist by force. So that's a very, it's a very different scenario than what we have now. And the border, the argument is often, well, we need this form of government violence because right now there's still that form of government violence. And the truth, there is a piece of truth in that without the welfare state, there's less of a draw for people who want to come here and get free stuff. So I'm absolutely in favor of ending both, but you don't advocate one evil unless and until a different one changes. As far as handling things like diseases and stuff, it's not, so many of those questions are sort of looking for a master plan. I don't believe in master plans. I believe in allowing people to be free and have them come up with a zillion different solutions to things, which always works better than the government solution.
Well, sometimes their solutions end up being governments. That's how governments tend to be created. This is the thing. You don't realize that in the long game, it is completely the culture. If you bring in a bunch of people that believe in government, one day they're going to say, hey, there's a lot of people with diseases coming in here. You know what we should do? We should create a government that creates a border amongst
you
us.
Believe in government. You're one of them.
Yeah, because I want to keep the maximum amount of freedom possible within my area. Luckily, I don't believe, like I said, in like other cultures, in eating people or throwing gays off roofs. And I don't want that coming into my little zone of happy freedom where we're allowed to do a lot more than a lot of the rest of the world.
Can I ask you a quick thing? Why is the line around the country the relevant thing?
Why is it a relevant
why
thing?
don't you draw a random... Why is that the border that you think is
why do you need a nation? You're asking...
The line around the country, that's where the border is.
Yes.
Why is that where you think it's justified to initiate violence?
Because it's the outside of my community that has agreed we are going to have a set state of values and laws, and the people within that border agree on a set culture, state of laws. Unfortunately, that's changing right now, of course. We're trying to say, what is Canada? Oh, it's multicultural, it's this and that. No, the reality is we were based off of Christian, European values to start, and those are things that I believe have created the most free areas, and it just how happens within this landmass, a lot of those people with the same values live.
Okay, well,
well, what I'm going to do right now is interject because we have some requirements for tech people to get some lunch and to get a break. I think we could really go on for days, right? A round of applause for both of our panelists here. You're both professional. Wonderful.
There was an idea
to bring together a group of remarkable people
to see if we could become something more. So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could.
In time, the state will know what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that it's right, yet to fail all the same. Dread it. Run from it. Freedom still arrives.
Vacate the state. Engage all the speakers and get this man a microphone.
Fun isn't something that one considers when eradicating tyranny. But this does put a smile on my face.